Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome all you good thinkers from around the globe. I'm going to welcome the first good thinker, longtime good thinker. Hey, Abderrachid. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. This is the time that we spend many Mondays, not all Mondays, try to get them in as often as possible. 9 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, to spend a little time thinking about our thinking, to set aside all the time that we spend on what to think so we can think about how to improve how we think, or to think about, okay, so we've lost access to, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do, hold on a second, we've got a little problem because we lost access to LinkedIn. So now I have to put a code in. So just one moment, please. Just one moment, please. This is the lovely aspect of technology that we have to deal with. Thank you very much. Allow. I don't know what is happening. I think what happened was, for those of you streaming on, so hopefully how we are has lost access. Click here. Are we on LinkedIn? Can anyone tell me if you see anyone from LinkedIn? Click here to reconnect. I'm having to reconnect again. Here we are. Okay. That's this. Let's see. So hopefully we are not just streaming from YouTube, but we do stream live from YouTube Live, and LinkedIn Live. So for those of you who are tuning in saying, hey, where is this LinkedIn Live link? Something is happening. You know, Microsoft did get hacked and there was this little issue maybe with disconnecting from StreamYard. So lovely technology. Hopefully we are all here. Would someone from LinkedIn please let us know who you are and where you're from, so we know we have people here from LinkedIn and that we are streaming live. I don't see anyone yet, so I'm sure I'm going to start getting some text saying, where are you? Where are you? Let me see if I have any texts saying, where are you? Let me think, because I'm hoping that this is working on LinkedIn. It looks like it is. Okay, so we will get started. And if we go for a few minutes and no one is letting us know who you are and where you're from, other than people streaming from YouTube, then we'll know that we've got to probably maybe do this again, do a round two. And again, this is the flexibility that one has. It's like you have this sweat that comes on when you're going to do something live or something remote, and then the technology doesn't work. Okay, so I see that. Okay, so we've got people streaming in from YouTube, but does anyone have access from LinkedIn? That's what I want to know. Oh, Barclays. So let's just see. Lots of people from LinkedIn saying it's working. Okay, great. I don't see any. So here's the problem. We're good, but I'm not seeing any of your comments. So I don't know why, but I have no way to bring in your comments from LinkedIn this time. So I did get a text saying that we're streaming live from LinkedIn. I apologize. This is a problem with technology. All right, let's get started. Should you ask uncomfortable questions? Well, let's start with a definition. What is an uncomfortable question? What is an uncomfortable question? And there was going to be a lot of back and forth. As you know, this is a very collaborative conversation. So if you are not and you want to be participating and you're on LinkedIn Live, you may need to switch over to YouTube Live, jump on Becky Saltzman, and then you can comment from YouTube, because for some reason LinkedIn isn't showing me your comments. Okay. So let me see if I can maybe I can fix that. Let me just see. You are live. I don't know why I'm not seeing any comments. Okay. What is an uncomfortable conversation? What is an uncomfortable conversation? Think about it for yourself. When you think about an uncomfortable conversation, are you thinking more from the position of the person asking it? Like, I'm really uncomfortable asking a lot of questions. Or are you thinking more from the position of the person being asked? Like, I really don't like being asked uncomfortable questions. When you think about this, which one are you thinking more? A, as the person asking, or B, as the person being asked? Because that can help you understand how to define an uncomfortable conversation. And we're not going to get into a lot of what is already talked about of how you deal with an uncomfortable conversation. We're going to talk about what the research suggests. So is an uncomfortable conversation the same as a sensitive conversation or question? Not conversation, question. Is an uncomfortable question the same? I keep saying conversation, I mean questions. Is an uncomfortable question the same as a sensitive question? Now we've got Abdurrashid here, so we're going to take advantage. Definitely you should, because thinking is an uncomfortable process. Aha. Aha. Okay, I love it. You're going to be closer to the research, and it's going to be on you to, Abdurrashid, to ask a lot of questions today and participate, unless people switch over to YouTube and go to Becky Saltzman, join, and you can join the conversation. And hopefully at that point, I will be able to see your comments, because I'm not seeing any comments from LinkedIn. All right. How is an uncomfortable question different from an inappropriate question? What's the difference? What makes a question inappropriate? Okay, what makes a question inappropriate? And then this is a question we've asked before on good thinking, but I always put it in a different context, because I think the answer to this question varies depending on how you frame it, which is it true that there are no bad questions? So we've talked about uncomfortable questions, we've talked about sensitive questions, we've talked about inappropriate questions. Now we're asking, is it true that there are no bad questions? What do you think? Okay, so Abdurrashid says, I would say it depends on how people perceive the uncomfortable questions. Okay, that's excellent. Ooh, that's foreshadowing for the research that we're going to talk about. When are uncomfortable conversations good questions? When are they bad questions? Oh, I wish I had to see your participation, but here's what we'll do. Go ahead and still, if you're on LinkedIn and you're putting in your things, comment among yourselves. And then after the live show, I'll get in and we'll comment, and we'll make the comments post live show. I just love bringing your comments in, but technology isn't allowing it. So sensitive questions are questions that are about topics you might feel uncomfortable to discuss. So they're kind of uncomfortable questions. And these can be questions that are also inappropriate in a specific context, and or about information that the person being asked might not want to discuss, or might want to keep private, or maybe might not want to discuss in the context. So a lot of things can come to mind. Questions about your financial situation, questions about politics, about religion, sex, your relationships you have with others. So what could be sensitive with a stranger may or may not be sensitive with a coworker or close friend. And here's what's also interesting. What could be sensitive with a coworker or even a close friend may not be sensitive with a stranger, which is why we see a lot of people just revealing things that they might not be able to reveal to their best friends or family members, but they are fairly comfortable revealing them to a huge audience on YouTube or on social media. They can say things on social media out to this amorphous, broad public that they might not be able to ask. I'm not saying say things, I'm talking about questions. So keep switching. Sorry about that. They may not be able to ask of their best friends. So here's the thing that's interesting. In some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and a lot of it actually, people are encouraged to stay away from asking uncomfortable questions that could be perceived as microaggressions. All right. So should you avoid asking questions that could be perceived as a microaggression? All right. So I'm going to be, oh, yay. Some of you are jumping over to YouTube. Okay. Is it okay that I'm a 19-year-old skinny gay guy? I like wearing women's jeans. Okay. That's a great question. Is it okay? Is it okay? So this will give you a little hint as someone being asked a question. Now, I don't find that a super uncomfortable question, but I'm not really I don't really define a lot of questions as uncomfortable, even for myself, because no matter how uncomfortable a question that I'm asked, I feel prepared to answer in a way that provides comfort for me and comfort for the person asking, as long as it's being asked out of curiosity. So I like that Evan asked that question. And I would just say, oh, that interesting question. Ooh, good one. In what context are you asking? How are you asking? What does it mean to be okay? And then you can start a conversation. So that question, I think, is a great question, and it could be seen as uncomfortable by the asker or the askee. All right. So Abdurrashid says, can we add trust as a variable? Yeah, we can add trust as a variable for sure. Because trust involves, what do you trust that person to do? Trust isn't just this global thing like I trust someone. Trust is, maybe we'll do a whole topic on trust, how to rethink trust. If you are on and you want to say, would this be an interesting topic for another good thinking? the whole issue of trust, put a yes, issue of trust, yes, issue of trust, no. All right. So should you be avoid asking questions that could be perceived as microaggressions? Who wants to weigh in, yes or no? No, a microaggression is a behavior or action, and this could be intentional or unintentional. But this is the definition is, or one definition that that is an action or behavior that subtly undermines someone's identity. Okay. And someone's identity can be very difficult if you don't know them and you can't ask questions. I mean, that's kind of a circular challenge. So have you ever been asked a question that you took or perceived as a microaggression? Have you ever been asked a question that you perceive as a microaggression? Some people feel that being asked a question like, where are you from, in certain contexts, can feel like a microaggression, like an insinuation that a person doesn't fit in. And there's a conundrum here because understanding cultural differences that might be informed by where someone is from may be the greatest clue to understanding and empathizing with how they'll perceive questions you may ask. For example, a discussion of salary may be sensitive in some cultures. Is discussing salary sensitive or uncomfortable in your culture? Because if we saw all the people weighing in on who you are and where you're from, we'll see that people are coming from all different cultures and all different geographic backgrounds, all different geographies, and all different perspectives and viewpoints. So my question is, in your culture, is discussing salary an uncomfortable question if someone asks you about salary? You know, maybe in the US, I can say for the most part, and not for everyone, but as a cultural norm, most people would say, yes, that's an uncomfortable question. And maybe in Israel, people would say, no, why would that be uncomfortable? We ask that all the time. So there is a huge cultural context in terms of what makes an uncomfortable question and what makes it a microaggression. So your own culture and identity will determine whether an uncomfortable question feels like a microaggression. Your neurons have learned from your culture and your experiences, your family and your genetics and all the things that make our neurons fire the way they do, that something is or is not. The same uncomfortable question is or is not a microaggression. So that can change. Your perception of whether an uncomfortable question can become a microaggression can change. You can learn to view certain uncomfortable questions as microaggressions, even if you don't feel them yourself. Even if you're in the identity group that has been told this is a microaggression, you should feel that it's a microaggression. And you might think, I don't feel that it's a microaggression. It's not a fact. These things are hard and true facts. These are ways that we perceive. So in the willingness to answer questions is affected by the presence of others, but also the members of a group tend to follow one another's lead. So when you learn certain things might be microaggression, so you shouldn't ask these uncomfortable questions, you can learn that as easily as you can unlearn that. And I mean that from a perspective of the asker and the askee. I mean, that's just, So Abdurrajid says, let's see, you could add courage since people share information that are triggered by uncomfortable questions. And you're just like, wait, where are our rubber chickens? We need some. Okay, Abdurrajid and Evan, get all the rubber chickens for holding down the question fort, the answers and the participation fort. Rubber chickens, because we need that today. And then let's see, I usually refer to those questions as a personal question, just as a justification, and don't answer them. Okay. Yearly salary is an uncomfortable question. Okay. And that depends. In your culture, yearly salary. In my culture, yearly salary would probably be considered an uncomfortable question. And then it depends on the context and who's asking. Or if imagine you're mentoring someone who wants to go into your field, wants to do what you do. And they say, I have no idea how much someone in your position makes. Like what should I aim for? How should I budget my life? What should I plan? And so they say, would you mind sharing your, yearly salary so I can get a data point? Now, some people would say that is super sensitive. And other people would say, no, in that context, it's not an uncomfortable question at all. So in one set of studies, participants were asked a series of sensitive questions, things that the researchers in this set of studies, a whole bunch of studies actually, decided were sensitive. Like they said, have you ever bounced a check? Then they asked some really sensitive kind of sex related questions. It was kind of very sensitive. I think across a lot of cultures, that would be very sensitive. Group A were told that most others in the study were willing to reveal the stigmatizing answers. So have you ever bounced a check? Group A was told most people answer this question and have no problem with it. Group B was told that most others were unwilling to reveal stigmatizing answers. So 2 different groups. Which group, A or B, was more likely to answer sensitive questions? Was it Group A, Group B, or was there no difference? The sensitive question was a sensitive question and it was resilient to framing. Well, I can't see, put your answers in the chat. Put your answers in the chat, and then we'll get to it afterwards if you're putting your stuff in LinkedIn. So which participants, Group A, Group B, or it didn't matter the framing, a sensitive question, an uncomfortable question is uncomfortable no matter what. You shouldn't ask them. Well, as it turns out, participants in Group A were almost 30% more likely to reveal sensitive answers when it was framed that other people revealed these answers too. So whether we perceive questions as microaggressions or not might have something to do with how we're told we should perceive these questions. In a meeting or group setting, it takes only a few closed off people for questions to lose their probing power. But the opposite is true. As soon as one person starts to open up, the rest of the group is likely to follow suit. And that works in all kinds of ways. You see, and in all kinds of ways when you ask uncomfortable questions in group settings. Now, the best uncomfortable questions are probably asked in one-on-one, but there are times where uncomfortable questions might be asked in a group setting. Like in our curiosity workshops, we learn to deal with asking, probing, or what we call MVQ, most valuable questions given the context. So, you have to be ready to bust your assumptions and challenge your assumptions if you want to engage in a culture of curiosity. So we know that group settings can have different dynamics than one-on-one in terms of asking uncomfortable questions. So what do you do? How do you know whether a question is completely comfortable to you, but it might not be comfortable to someone else or the person you're asking? But maybe you'd be completely comfortable with someone asking you something that someone else says, oh, that's a microaggression. And you might say, well, that's because there's a dynamic of privilege or oppression. And that definitely has a role for sure. But that doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't even come close to telling the whole story. So what do you do? So see if you can predict what the research suggests. Do you think that the research suggests, and this is the big question, you ready? Do you think, and this is not just a little research here or there, this is overwhelming research. And if you're interested in diving deeper, I can provide you some information. But what does the research suggest? Does it suggest that we underestimate how offensive our uncomfortable questions are to other people? Do we just go around asking uncomfortable questions that are seen as microaggressions to other people? A, or do we overestimate how offensive the uncomfortable questions might be to our partners? So do we ask too many questions that are offensive, or do we refrain from asking questions because we might think that they're uncomfortable? A or B? And I'm dying to see your answers. I'm so frustrated that I can't see your answers on LinkedIn, but I'll see them afterwards. And everyone will see each other's. So Abdrachit says, you can question the courage of people beforehand. You can prime people. I love that while people are answering. You can prime people, saying this is a environment of curiosity. So no microaggression. We're going to talk about all that. All right. Well, the overwhelming research suggests, ding, 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 that the answer is B. The answer is B. We actually avoid asking uncomfortable questions more than we blurt out uncomfortable questions. And we do this at our peril. In a research titled The Better Than Expected Consequence of Asking Sensitive Questions, 3 researchers, Hart, Van Epps, and Schweitzer, they did a whole series of studies, and they found that we have a major aversion to asking sensitive questions or uncomfortable questions because we believe that asking uncomfortable questions will make our conversation partner uncomfortable. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't want to make someone uncomfortable. They also found that this aversion rather, had huge economic consequences because it reflected a flawed understanding of the relational impact of uncomfortable questions across all 5 studies. And there's other studies too, and they all come up with this same kind of result. They demonstrated that individuals worried too much about asking questions that might be deemed uncomfortable. And in hindsight, after asking uncomfortable questions, they overestimated how much the person being asked was sensitive, or the cost, the relational cost, the relationship cost of having had those questions asked. And this was true in face-to-face conversations and in computer-mediated conversations. So yeah, some people will feel that being asked uncomfortable questions are microaggressions, but most do not. Most do not. We may systematically overestimate the negative cost of asking uncomfortable questions. So in conversations with friends and with strangers, face-to-face and computer mediated, these things were found. So how much is your salary was as uncomfortable as how you get to work. I mean, it really did not have a huge negative impact on relationships. I want to see if I'm getting any text. Aha, good. Okay, we're getting people responding, and that's fantastic. I just don't get to see it and pull you up on. So why is this costly? Why is this costly? So what? I mean, why don't you just err on the side of not asking? Well, it turns out because direct questions about delicate topics can lead to deeper and more meaningful conversations that actually foster greater understanding, bringing people together, and more intellectual empathy, meaning not just putting yourself in someone else's shoes, but taking yourself out of the equation to the extent that you can, and really understanding someone without bringing in all of your assumptions and all of your layers and all of your moral judgments. So as much as there are warnings about how asking uncomfortable conversations can be forms of microaggressions, the research continues to reveal that people overestimate this concern. So that's the science, okay? Provided your motives are honorable, not like you're trying to do something, you're asking out of curiosity and your motives are honorable, you should be willing to ask uncomfortable questions. But what about the art? When it comes to the art of asking uncomfortable questions, what's more important? Ready? A, the question that you're asked, or B, the context of the question, the context that the question is asked in, like where the question is asked or who else is in the conversation. Or C, and this part of context that we're talking, who is asking? What's more important? The question, where you are and who else is around, or the person asking? A, B, or C? What's more important? You could say they're all important, but when you really have to, if you had to put them in a ranking, what would be top? Top most important is the question asked, top most important is the person asking, or top most is where it's asked. All right. Now, what we were going to do, and this was going to be really, really fun, but since I can't see your answers, except for Abderach's, which is, okay, so B, then C. The context, then who's asking, and then is A last? You're saying A last, the actual question itself. I think it's probably true for most people when you really think about it. I was going to give you a whole bunch of uncomfortable questions and have you rank how uncomfortable you thought you were. And that was going to be fun because then we can see how different it is for different people. Like I'm totally comfortable answering this uncomfortable conversation or question. And but since I can't see your comments, we're not going to do that today. So we will skip to some other juicy stuff that we had planned that will work better. Since I can't see, you can see each other's comments and I can't. Okay. All right. So it turns out that we are using this flawed mental model where we assume that questions are too uncomfortable to be asked. And some of our learnings and trainings on microaggressions where you're told don't ask these questions, not how you can get to this information or why this information might be helpful, but how this is perceived or could be perceived by an identity group. Turns out it's fairly flawed because identity groups, just like your family, like if I say to you, your family, my family, my Saltzman family, do you all agree on the same thing politically, even sensitive topics like what are your views on abortion, or how much is it appropriate to ask about your salary, or why don't you have kids? That could be, are you thinking of having children, or what are your views on children, or any kind of sensitive topic. I mean, you can get really sensitive. We don't all agree, and we're a family identity group, so it is very clear that it's difficult to speak about what is uncomfortable and not uncomfortable in terms of questions based on an identity. So that gets a little tricky. And the research bears this out. We don't all agree, even if we seem like we're the same member of an identity group. When people are brave enough to ask sensitive questions, they may think that they have harmed the relationships more than they have. Now, of course, how you ask a sensitive question matters a lot. So rather than blurting out a delicate question whenever it comes to mind, you should kind of self-reflect. Why do I need to know this information? How will this advance my relationship with this person, or maybe my goal in communicating with this person? If you're trying to sell them something, or get to know them better, or manage them, or be managed by them, or being promoted, however you're going to think about influence. Why are you having this conversation in the first place? What are your goals? And then take time to explain why you're asking this question and how you plan to use this information. You think, well, how do I do that? So reflect on these things and find an appropriate environment, but don't abandon good manners or ignore cultural norms, but do challenge your assumptions about the harm that asking sensitive questions actually causes. So let's get into the takeaways, because we're going to do takeaways for the question asker and takeaways for the receiver of the uncomfortable questions. What can you do to advance a relationship when you're asked what may feel like an uncomfortable question? So we know that people err too far on the side of politeness, which is like, you wouldn't think that, but you don't see a lot of people posting on social media about, oh, I was asked all these great questions that, or mundane questions. People usually like to vent their frustration. So we may have a skewed view of how people view uncomfortable questions as micro questions. And it turns out we also don't ask enough questions, not just the quality of the questions, but the quantity of questions. Most common complaints people make after having a conversation, like an interview or a date, is that I wish they had asked me more questions. I can't believe they didn't ask me any questions. So the quantity of questions. All right. So let's say, can we consider off record and on record situation? I love that. That's a great question. Can we keep this between ourselves? Absolutely. That's a good thing. That's a fair question. And that's an example of clarifying the question, not assuming ill intent, not assuming anything. You get asked a question that might be uncomfortable. You might be comfortable answering it in the context of privacy. That's a great insight. Rubber chicken fur. You're getting all the rubber chickens today. All right. Oh, here we go. Black notes. So if someone asked you, have you ever dated out of your race? Is that sensitive? Aha. Okay. Question. Great question. Apologize. I didn't say, oh, no. No, you're not offensive. Not offensive at all. Have you ever dated outside your race? How many of you think that that's a sensitive or uncomfortable question? Well, let's just say that, I don't find that uncomfortable, but again, I don't have a hypersensitivity to that. And a chief curiosity seeker means that I've kind of practiced curiosity and practiced the massive advantage of giving and getting the benefit of doubt. So let's just say you were asked that question and you felt like, oh, I don't know. Maybe the answer is no, I never have. Or maybe the answer is yes. Or maybe the answer is, whatever. You wonder to yourself, I've never really thought about that. You could say, ooh, good question. How should I think about that? How should I think about what providing this information to you might do? It's a cool question. How should I think about this? You can get clarification and really not assume someone's ill intent. Maybe they're just curious. Now, why are they curious? Well, maybe they think you don't know so much about people outside of your race because you've never dated someone outside of your race. So who are you to do X, Y, and Z? Good question. Who are you to do X, Y, and Z? These are great questions that can advance if you don't jump to assumptions about why people are asking, or are they going to be putting me in this trap? So I say rubber chickens to black notes. Rubber chickens to black notes. I think I would not suggest taking that as an uncomfortable question at all. And I would want clarification so that I could answer and advance the conversation in the best way possible, because that's the goal. And Abdurrahman says, I would consider that as a close-ended question and would only provide a yes or no. You could, unless your goal was to advance the relationship. If your goal is to just, you think it's uncomfortable, that question wasn't well asked, and ooh, how should we think about this? Not, why do you want to know? You could say yes, or you could say no. Yeah, I have, or no, I haven't. Could do that. Then, but you're not advancing the conversation. So let's get into 3 things that you can do if you feel you're being asked an uncomfortable question. And we'll get into this, because I want to get to this, and then we'll be done. All right. So if you feel triggered by being asked what you deem to be an uncomfortable question, reconsider it. Like, reconsider that question. I'm so glad, Black Notes, that you put that, because I think that's a totally great question for all kinds of reasons. But I don't know all the reasons. So I could tell you some reasons, but maybe you have 10 other reasons. And maybe those reasons have embedded assumptions that need to be questioned as well. So this should in no way, if you're asked an uncomfortable question, delegitimize how you feel. But how we feel is learned. We answer to our neurons, and our neurons, good news, are plastic. They can change. And it takes bravery to ask yourself whether an uncomfortable question is best understood by labeling it a microaggression. Maybe the answer is yes. It was intended as a microaggression. You could still choose to not take it as such if you wanted. But maybe the answer is no. So think about your response to uncomfortable questions as driven by your neurons, and your neurons can change. And my favorite trick for answering what I think is an uncomfortable question is, ooh, that's interesting. And how should I think about this? And and it's not a trick. It's just, I want to know how to think about it. Maybe I think about it as, should I think about this as a yes or no? Should I think deeper about using Black Notes question, what it means, what does race mean in this context? Could be a really deep, cool conversation that could advance and create a friendship, which is great. And number 3, make it a goal to spread curiosity and celebrate curiosity by encouraging more questions, not censoring or banning questions that we deem too uncomfortable for curiosity. So the answer is yes. For the most part, you should ask uncomfortable questions. So continue the questions in the chat, and I'm going to jump over to post live and try to engage. Sorry, I couldn't bring your questions in. Hope you have a great time, and tune in. We are here a lot of Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, on Good Thinking Live on LinkedIn. Or you can follow my YouTube channel. Mostly just do this show, Becky Saltzman, and you can subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. And mostly, I don't really have a lot on there, but just the Good Thinking Show if you want to participate from there. So thank you. And thank you. Special thanks to Abdurrahman and Black Notes who tuned in and carried the conversation.